Michael Carter thought his toughest battle was winning a custody case against his ex-wife. But when their son Ethan takes the stand and reveals a shocking secret, one that ties Michael to hidden bank accounts and a woman long thought dead, the courtroom becomes more than just a battleground for legal arguments. It becomes a trap. As old secrets unravel, Michael finds himself at the center of a conspiracy far bigger than he ever imagined. A powerful enemy from his past, Jonathan Reynolds, has set him up, using the court as a weapon to destroy him. Framed for crimes he didn't commit, hunted by those who were once his allies, and forced to run to protect the people he loves, Michael must fight back. But how do you prove your innocence when the evidence is stacked against you? And how do you stop a man who controls everything, even the court of law itself? The truth is about to be put on trial. Subscribe now for more stories packed with suspense, action, and twists you won't see coming. Don't forget to like this video and comment below, where in the world are you watching from? Michael Carter had prepared for this moment. He had spent months with his legal team crafting the perfect defense, ensuring every accusation from Laura would crumble in court. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, adjusted her glasses as she studied Ethan, waiting for him to continue. Michael's attorney, Richard Lawson, leaned in and whispered, "Stay calm. The court cannot act on baseless claims." But Michael wasn't calm. Something in Ethan's eyes unsettled him. "I saw you, Dad," Ethan continued. "I saw you making secret bank transfers. Thousands of dollars sent to a woman I've never heard of." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Laura's lips curled into a bitter smile. Michael stiffened. He had dismissed Laura's accusations as paranoia. But Ethan's words carried weight. The courtroom felt smaller, suffocating. "I don't know what you're talking about," Michael said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Then explain this," Ethan said, pulling out his phone. "I recorded the bank transactions." Gasps filled the courtroom. Even Richard looked concerned. Laura's attorney, Grace Mitchell, rose. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this as evidence." The judge nodded, allowing the evidence to be reviewed. A clerk retrieved the phone and connected it to the courtroom screen. Michael clenched his fists as the records appeared. Bank transfers. Recipients masked under initials. Repeated transactions. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted. Michael could feel the judgmental stares from the jury, the silent accusations from the gallery. "Mr. Carter," Grace said, "who is this woman? And why have you been sending her money?" Michael hesitated. He could lie, claim it was business-related. But he knew Ethan had more. His son wouldn't have taken the stand unless he was sure. Before he could answer, a voice rang out from the back of the courtroom. "I can tell you who I am." All heads turned. A woman in her late 40s, with deep brown eyes and a nervous expression, stood up. "My name is Sarah Williams." Her voice trembled. "And I have been living a lie for 20 years. Laura's face turned pale. Michael's entire world tilted. Sarah Williams, the woman Laura believed had died 2 decades ago. Dead silence filled the courtroom. Then chaos erupted. The courtroom erupted with whispers as Sarah Williams stepped forward. The judge banged her gavel twice. "Order. There will be order in this court." Michael Carter sat frozen, his carefully crafted defense crumbling before his eyes. His ex-wife, Laura, looked at Sarah as if she had seen a ghost. "This must be a mistake," Michael muttered under his breath. But Sarah met his gaze. "No, Michael. It's time the truth came out." Richard Lawson, Michael's attorney, stood quickly. "Your Honor, who is this woman? This is highly irregular. If she has something to say, she should be sworn in properly." The judge sighed, nodding. "Ms. Williams, if you have relevant testimony, step forward and be sworn in." A bailiff approached, holding out a Bible. Sarah placed her hand on it, her fingers trembling. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "Yes," she whispered. Michael's stomach twisted. He had spent years keeping this secret buried, but now in the middle of the courtroom, it was about to be ripped open. Grace Mitchell, Laura's attorney, approached the witness stand. Ms. Williams, the court must understand who are you? And why did Michael Carter send you money in secret? Sarah took a shaky breath. I'm Laura's sister. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Laura shot up from her chair. No, that's impossible. My sister died in a car accident 20 years ago. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. No, Laura. I didn't die. I disappeared. And Michael helped me do it. Michael felt his grip on reality slipping. He had been prepared to battle accusations of financial misconduct, maybe even infidelity. But this was something else entirely. Laura stumbled back into her seat. No, I don't believe this. Sarah turned to her, voice breaking. You have every right to hate me, but I had no choice. Grace narrowed her eyes. Tell the court what happened. Sarah inhaled sharply. 20 years ago, I was in trouble. I got involved with a dangerous man, someone who wouldn't let me go. He threatened my life, and I knew if I didn't disappear, I wouldn't survive. Michael was the only one who could help me. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Michael clenched his fists. Richard shot him a look. Do not say anything yet, he whispered. Laura's voice was barely audible. You're lying. I wish I were. Sarah's voice cracked. Michael created a new identity for me. He arranged everything, the paperwork, the money, the escape plan. He told me I could never look back. Laura's face twisted with betrayal. And you never thought to tell me? You let me mourn you. You let me believe you were dead. Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks. I was trying to protect you. The less you knew, the safer you were. Michael finally found his voice. Laura, I did what I had to do. Laura turned on him, eyes blazing. You let me think my sister was dead. You manipulated me. Michael clenched his jaw. I protected her. The judge raised a hand. Enough. This is a courtroom, not a family drama. She turned to Sarah. Ms. Williams, you understand that by admitting to faking your identity, you may be held legally accountable? Sarah nodded. I don't care. I just couldn't stay silent anymore. Grace took a step closer. Ms. Williams, you said you were in danger. From whom? Sarah hesitated, then whispered one name. Jonathan Reynolds. Michael's blood ran cold. Richard exhaled sharply. Laura's face turned blank. Ethan frowned. Who is Jonathan Reynolds? Michael looked down. He's a man I once trusted, and the man who could destroy us all. The courtroom fell silent. The name Jonathan Reynolds sent a chill through the courtroom. For the first time, Michael Carter's confident facade cracked. He shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward Sarah, then to his son, Ethan, who stared back at him, waiting for an answer. Ethan was the first to break the silence. Who is Jonathan Reynolds? Michael hesitated, but Laura's sharp voice cut through the tension. Yes, Michael. Who is he? And why does Sarah say he's dangerous? Richard Lawson, Michael's attorney, cleared his throat. Your Honor, I advise my client not to answer until we understand the legal implications. But Michael knew there was no hiding anymore. The truth was already seeping out. Keeping quiet now would only make him look guiltier. He inhaled deeply, his voice low and tense. Jonathan Reynolds is a man I once called a friend, Michael admitted. A very powerful, very dangerous man. Laura folded her arms. And what does he have to do with my sister disappearing for 20 years? Sarah swallowed hard. Because he was the one I was running from. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge narrowed her eyes. Ms. Williams, do you have evidence of this? Sarah nodded. I do. And I believe Michael does too. Michael's pulse quickened. Sarah didn't know what she was saying. Or worse, she did. Grace Mitchell, Laura's attorney, leaned forward. Let's be clear, Ms. Williams. Are you accusing Jonathan Reynolds of a crime? Sarah hesitated. Yes. What crime? Sarah's hands tightened on the witness stand. Murder. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Even the judge's expression darkened. Ms. Williams, this is a serious accusation. Sarah nodded. I know. Richard leaned toward Michael, whispering, we need to end this now. This is spiraling out of control. Michael ignored him. His mind raced, memories flooding back things he had buried for years. He had always known this day might come, but he had prayed it never would. Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. Dad, is it true? Michael exhaled sharply. Yes. Laura inhaled sharply, but it was Ethan's reaction that cut the deepest. The boy he had spent years protecting looked at him like he was a stranger. Jonathan Reynolds was involved in illegal dealings, Michael continued. Sarah got caught in the middle. She witnessed something she shouldn't have. Sarah nodded. I saw him kill a man. The weight of her words sank into the courtroom like an anchor. Even the jury members seemed rattled. Grace's voice was steady. And Michael helped you disappear because of it. Yes. Sarah's voice cracked. And I don't regret it. Michael clenched his jaw. Neither do I. Laura looked at him with disbelief. You mean to tell me you've been involved with a murderer all these years and you never told me? Michael met her gaze. I got out. But some things never truly stay buried. Ethan frowned. So, Jonathan Reynolds is still out there. Sarah stiffened. Yes. And if he finds out I'm here, we're all in danger. For the first time since the trial began, real fear settled over the courtroom. The judge cleared her throat. This court is not a place for conspiracy theories. If these allegations are true, then the matter must be handled by the proper authorities. Grace nodded. Your Honor, I request police protection for my client, Sarah Williams. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Granted. But if any of this is false, it's not, Michael interrupted. His voice was like steel. And if Reynolds knows Sarah is alive, he won't stop until she's dead. A cold dread settled over the room. The case had started as a financial dispute. Now it was something far more dangerous. The courtroom was no longer just a place of legal arguments. It had become a battleground of secrets, betrayal, and now fear. The weight of Sarah's revelation hung over everyone like a storm cloud, thick with tension and uncertainty. Judge Holloway sighed, rubbing her temples before addressing the courtroom. These are grave allegations. The court will not entertain baseless accusations, nor will it ignore potential criminal activity. Ms. Williams, you say you witnessed Jonathan Reynolds commit murder. Do you have any evidence? Sarah swallowed hard. No physical evidence, Your Honor. But I remember every detail. The night it happened, the warehouse near the Hudson River, the man he shot in cold blood. She shivered at the memory. I knew if I didn't run, I'd be next. Michael clenched his jaw. He had been there that night, not at the crime scene, but hours later, when Sarah called him in a panic, her voice trembling as she begged for help. Grace Mitchell, Laura's attorney, stepped forward. Your Honor, we request immediate law enforcement intervention. If this is true, then Sarah Williams is not safe, and neither is my client. She glanced at Laura, whose face had paled. Judge Holloway nodded. I will notify the authorities, but until then, this court remains focused on the case at hand. Mr. Carter, let me remind you, you are still under scrutiny. The financial records your son provided indicate substantial transfers to Ms. Williams. If your actions were purely for her protection, why keep it secret? Michael hesitated. He knew the truth wouldn't be enough. Courts didn't deal in emotions. They dealt in evidence. Before he could answer, Richard Lawson, his attorney, spoke up. Your Honor, my client acted under extreme circumstances. If what Ms. Williams says is true, then secrecy was a necessity, not a choice. My client is not a criminal, he is a man who was protecting a woman in danger. Grace scoffed. By moving large sums of money in untraceable ways? Sounds more like money laundering than heroism. Michael shot her a glare. If I wanted to launder money, I wouldn't have used my own name. The courtroom murmured in response. Even Judge Holloway seemed to consider his point. Then Ethan, still seated at the witness stand, leaned forward. "Dad, you said Reynolds is dangerous. If he finds out we're talking about him, what happens next?" Michael felt something cold settle in his chest. "He won't take chances," he admitted. "He'll eliminate threats." Laura turned sharply toward him. "You mean he'll come after Sarah?" Michael nodded. "And after you?" Again he nodded. Laura's voice dropped to a whisper. "And after Ethan?" Michael's stomach twisted. The thought had crossed his mind, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Judge Holloway's face darkened. "If what you're saying is true, Mr. Carter, then this courtroom is no longer just dealing with financial discrepancies or family disputes. This is now a matter of life and death." Grace took a deep breath, turning back to Sarah. "You said you remember every detail of the murder. What about the victim? Do you remember his name?" Sarah closed her eyes, drawing in a shaky breath. "Daniel Foster." Michael exhaled sharply. He had forgotten that name. Grace frowned. "And did you ever report this to the police?" Sarah shook her head. "I didn't trust the police. Reynolds has connections everywhere. If I had gone to the authorities, I would have disappeared for real." Grace nodded, stepping back. "Your Honor, in light of this testimony, I request an official investigation into Jonathan Reynolds and the murder of Daniel Foster." Judge Holloway pursed her lips. "I will grant the request. However, this court will proceed with the original case until law enforcement takes over the criminal matter." She turned to Michael. "Mr. Carter, until further notice, you and Ms. Williams are under court protection. You are not to leave town." Michael clenched his fists. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for Ethan. As the judge called for a recess, Michael glanced toward the courtroom doors. He had the sickening feeling that Reynolds already knew, and that meant time was running out. The courtroom doors swung open, and two uniformed officers entered. Judge Holloway had wasted no time. Law enforcement was already involved. But Michael Carter knew it wouldn't be enough. Not against Jonathan Reynolds. Sarah looked pale, gripping the edge of the witness stand. Ethan kept glancing at his father, waiting for an explanation that would make all of this make sense. But there was none. Judge Holloway tapped her gavel. "Court is now in recess for 1 hour. During this time, officers will begin their preliminary investigation into Ms. Williams' allegations. Mr. Carter, Ms. Williams, you are not to leave the courthouse until further notice." Michael clenched his jaw. He had expected this, but it didn't make the situation any better. He turned to Richard, his lawyer. "We need to get ahead of this." Richard sighed. "Michael, let me be clear. Right now you're not just fighting for your reputation. If the court finds anything linking you to Reynolds' activities, you could be facing obstruction of justice charges. Or worse." Michael ran a hand over his face. "I didn't commit a crime." "Then you better pray that Reynolds doesn't decide to make it look like you did," Richard muttered. The bailiffs instructed everyone to clear the courtroom for the recess. As Michael stood, Ethan grabbed his arm. "Dad, wait." Michael looked down at his son. His expression was a mix of confusion and something else. Fear. Ethan lowered his voice. "Do you think Reynolds already knows?" Michael hesitated. "Yeah," he admitted. "I do." Ethan exhaled shakily. "Then what happens now?" Michael glanced toward the officers near the judge's bench. They were discussing something in hushed tones. Now, he thought grimly, we wait for the inevitable. Michael, Ethan, and Sarah were escorted to a waiting room inside the courthouse. The walls were dull, the chairs uncomfortable, and the tension thick. Laura had been taken to a separate room with her lawyer. Sarah sat stiffly, hands in her lap. "Michael, if he knows, what do we do?" Michael didn't answer, because he didn't know. Then the door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped in. Michael tensed immediately. He knew who this was before the man even spoke. "Mr. Carter," the man greeted smoothly. "Ms. Williams." His eyes flicked to Ethan. "And your son?" It's been a long time. Ethan's brow furrowed. Who? Michael stood abruptly. Reynolds sent you. The man. Robert Langley smiled. He sends his regards. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. A courthouse. A public place. And yet, Reynolds still had the audacity to send someone here. Langley took a step forward, adjusting his cuffs. Let's not make this difficult. Reynolds is willing to be reasonable. He just wants to talk. Michael let out a cold laugh. He doesn't negotiate. He eliminates. Langley sighed. Then I suppose the court will have a very interesting day tomorrow. Michael narrowed his eyes. What's that supposed to mean? Langley smirked. You'll find out soon enough. Then he turned and left, as if he had only stopped by for a friendly chat. Sarah let out a shaky breath. Michael, I know, he muttered. Reynolds was already making his move. And now, the courtroom wasn't just a place for justice. It had become a battlefield. Michael Carter had always believed that the courtroom was a place of law and order, a battleground where truth prevailed. But now, standing in the dimly lit courthouse waiting room, he realized the court had become something else entirely, a trap. Sarah Williams sat frozen, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. Ethan stood close to his father, his young face tense with confusion and fear. The words of Robert Langley, the man Reynolds had sent, still echoed in the room. You'll find out soon enough. Michael clenched his fists. He had spent years staying away from Reynolds, cutting ties with the man who had once been his closest friend. But now, Reynolds had found a way to pull him back in, right in the middle of a courthouse. Sarah broke the silence. Michael, what does he mean? What's going to happen? Michael didn't answer immediately. He was thinking, calculating. If Reynolds was planning something inside the courthouse, it meant one of two things. Either he had people working on the inside, or he was setting Michael up for something much worse. Ethan swallowed hard. Dad, are we safe here? Michael turned to his son, seeing the fear in his eyes. He refused to let Reynolds drag Ethan into this. He knelt down, gripping his son's shoulders firmly. Listen to me. No matter what happens, stay close to me. Do you understand? Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Before Michael could say anything else, the door swung open, and a bailiff entered. The judge has called everyone back to court immediately. There's been a development. Michael exchanged a glance with Sarah. His gut told him this was bad. As they walked back into the courtroom, Michael's senses were on high alert. The air was thick with tension. Judge Holloway sat behind the bench, her expression unreadable. Officers stood at every exit. Something had changed. Laura sat in her seat, looking unnerved. Grace Mitchell, her attorney, whispered something to her, but Laura barely responded. Michael sat beside Richard Lawson, who leaned in. I don't like this, the lawyer muttered. Michael agreed. Judge Holloway tapped her gavel. This court is now back in session. Due to new evidence submitted to the court, we must address a serious matter before proceeding with the original case. Michael's pulse quickened. New evidence? Gray stood. Your Honor, the prosecution has received an anonymous package containing documents that suggest Mr. Carter has been involved in fraudulent financial activities linked to Jonathan Reynolds. The room fell into stunned silence. Michael shot up from his chair. What? That's a lie. Judge Holloway raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Carter. The court will review the evidence before making any decisions. Michael's mind raced. He knew exactly what was happening. Reynolds had planted evidence against him. Laura turned to him, her expression unreadable. Michael, is any of this true? No, he said firmly. But even as he spoke, he knew that didn't matter. The court dealt in evidence, not truth. The judge signaled to the clerk, who pulled out a thick envelope. The court has reviewed the documents, which include offshore bank accounts under Mr. Carter's name, linked to illegal transactions. Michael's blood ran cold. Ethan's voice broke through the chaos. Dad, what's happening? Michael barely heard him. His entire world had just been flipped upside down. Judge Holloway looked at Michael. Until further investigation, this court has no choice but to hold you for questioning. The gavel slammed. Michael's worst fear had just come true. Reynolds had turned the court against him. Michael Carter sat frozen, his mind racing as the weight of Judge Holloway's words settled over him. Hold you for questioning. It was a legal way of saying they were treating him like a suspect, like a criminal. Reynolds had done exactly what Michael feared. He had turned the very institution of justice against him. And in a court of law, fabricated evidence was sometimes just as dangerous as real proof. Ethan's voice broke through the haze. You can't arrest my dad. He didn't do anything. Judge Holloway's face softened slightly as she looked at Ethan, but her voice remained firm. Young man, this court does not make arrests. But in light of this new evidence, your father will be detained for questioning by federal authorities. Michael turned to Richard Lawson, his lawyer. You need to stop this. Richard was already flipping through the documents that had been submitted. His brow furrowed. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. These documents looked legitimate. Michael clenched his fists. Because Reynolds has people forging them. Sarah looked at Michael, panic in her eyes. If they take you in, how do we prove it's fake? Michael exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think. We can't, not yet. Reynolds planned this too well. Grace Mitchell, Laura's attorney, stood and adjusted her suit. Your Honor, considering the severity of these allegations, I request that Mr. Carter be placed in protective custody until law enforcement can verify the authenticity of these documents. Michael's stomach twisted. Protective custody. That meant being held somewhere secure out of reach. Away from Ethan. Away from Sarah. Away from the courtroom. Laura turned to Grace, startled. Wait, protective custody? He's not guilty of anything yet. Grace kept her gaze steady. That's exactly why he needs protection. If Reynolds is as dangerous as they say, then Mr. Carter may be in danger himself. Michael's lips pressed into a thin line. He could see it now. Reynolds didn't just want him arrested. He wanted him isolated. Away from the case. Away from the courtroom. Richard stood abruptly. Your Honor, I object. If my client is taken into custody, we have no way of ensuring his safety. Judge Holloway studied Michael for a long moment. Mr. Carter, do you understand the position this court is in? We have no choice but to proceed with an official inquiry. Michael met her gaze. And what happens if I refuse to go into custody? The judge sighed. Then the court will have no choice but to issue a warrant for your detainment under federal jurisdiction. Meaning he would no longer be in the hands of the court. He would be in the hands of federal agents. And that was exactly what Reynolds wanted. Ethan grabbed Michael's arm. Dad, you can't let them take you. Michael looked at his son, the weight of their situation crashing down on him. If he went with the authorities, he might never walk free again. But if he resisted, he would look guilty. He had one shot. Michael turned to Sarah. You need to get out of here. Her eyes widened. What? If Reynolds is behind this, then the court isn't safe for you either. If I'm removed, you'll be next. Sarah swallowed hard, understanding dawning in her eyes. Richard looked between them. Michael, if you run, you'll make this worse. I'm not running, Michael said, standing. I'm making sure she does. Then, before anyone could react, he turned toward Ethan. Stay with your mother. Ethan's grip tightened. Dad, Michael pried Ethan's fingers from his sleeve. Then, just as the bailiffs moved toward him, Michael bolted. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Michael Carter moved before anyone could stop him. Years of instinct took over, not panic, not fear, but survival. As the bailiffs lunged, he spun toward the nearest exit. A sea of gasps and shouts filled the courtroom, but he didn't stop to look back. The moment his feet hit the polished floor of the courthouse hallway, he knew he had only seconds before security locked the building down. Behind him, Ethan yelled, Dad, don't. But Michael couldn't stop. Sarah needed to escape. Ethan needed to stay safe. And Michael? He needed to stay free long enough to fix this. The courthouse was a maze of corridors and glass-paneled offices. He sprinted past startled clerks and confused legal aides, his mind racing. He had memorized the court layout years ago, habit, not paranoia. There was only one way out now, the back service entrance. A voice boomed through the hallway intercom. Security lockdown initiated. All exits secured. Michael cursed. He pushed harder, weaving through the corridors as uniformed guards scrambled toward him. A court officer rounded a corner ahead, blocking his path. "Sir, stop now." Michael didn't hesitate. He grabbed a nearby filing cart and shoved it forward. The metal wheels screeched, papers flying everywhere. The officer dodged, giving Michael just enough time to slip past. 3 more doors. Footsteps pounded behind him. Voices shouted orders. 2 more doors. A radio crackled. Suspect moving toward the rear exit cut him off. 1 more door. Michael reached the final hallway only to see 2 security guards sealing the service exit. He skidded to a stop, his mind working fast. The walls were lined with offices, most of them locked. But then a janitor's closet. Michael yanked the handle. Unlocked. He slipped inside just as the guards rushed past. The air inside was thick with cleaning chemicals. Michael pressed his ear against the door, listening. A radio voice crackled. "Negative. He's not here. Keep searching." Michael exhaled, his pulse pounding. He couldn't stay here long. Reynolds would have people watching every court security camera, waiting for him to resurface. Then movement outside caught his eye. A janitor, pushing a laundry cart. Michael didn't think. He acted. The moment the man turned the corner, Michael slipped out, grabbed an empty uniform off a nearby hook, and yanked it on over his clothes. He adjusted the cap low over his face and grabbed the laundry cart. With a deep breath, he stepped into the hallway, walking, not running. Security was everywhere, but they weren't looking for a janitor. Michael kept his head down, maneuvering through the corridors, pushing the cart toward the employee exit. His heart pounded as he approached the final checkpoint, a single guard watching the staff doors. The man barely looked up as Michael pushed through. And just like that, Michael Carter was out of the courthouse. The cool air hit him like a shock. He was standing in the alley behind the courthouse, heart still hammering. But he wasn't safe yet. Reynolds had set this up too perfectly. The court had become his personal chessboard, and Michael was just another piece. If he wanted to survive, he had to move fast. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message. "Blocked number. You can run, Michael, but you can't hide." Michael's jaw tightened. He wasn't running. He was fighting back. Michael Carter didn't stop moving. The moment he stepped out of the courthouse, he knew Reynolds' people would be searching for him. The text message only confirmed it. They were watching. The streets outside the courthouse bustled with pedestrians, reporters, and police officers, all oblivious to the fact that the most wanted man in the building was walking right past them. Michael kept his head down, pushing the janitor's cart like he belonged. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Michael ducked into a side alley, stripping off the janitor's uniform and tossing it into a dumpster. He pulled out his phone and hesitated before making a call. Not to Richard, not to Sarah, and not to Ethan. No, he called Laura. She answered on the second ring. "Michael." Her voice was sharp, filled with shock and anger. "What the hell did you just do?" "Listen to me," Michael said quickly. "You're the only one in that courtroom who still has enough influence to stop this." "Stop this?" Laura hissed. "You just ran from a judge, Michael. Do you have any idea how guilty that makes you look?" "I don't care how it looks," he snapped. Reynolds set me up. You know it. You saw how perfectly timed that evidence was." Laura was silent for a moment. Then she sighed. "Damn it. I don't know what to believe." Michael took a deep breath. "Then believe this. If Reynolds gets what he wants, it won't just be me going down. He'll come for Sarah. And if Ethan stays near me, He let the words hang. Laura inhaled sharply. Where are you? Michael hesitated. He wasn't sure if she was asking because she wanted to help or because she wanted to turn him in. Just tell me, Laura pressed. Are you safe? For now, he admitted, but not for long. She was quiet again, but then she said something unexpected. Grace has doubts. Michael frowned. Your attorney? Yes. The evidence against you came too fast. Too clean. Grace isn't stupid, and she's questioning it. If we move quickly, we might be able to stop the court from completely turning against you. Michael felt the first flicker of hope. I need time, he said. I need to prove Reynolds faked those records. But I can't do it from inside a cell. Laura exhaled. Michael, if I help you, I'm risking everything. He closed his eyes. I know. There was another long silence. Then Laura said, meet me at the east parking garage. Level 3. 10 minutes. Michael's grip on the phone tightened. Are you sure? No, she muttered. But I'm doing it anyway. Then she hung up. Michael moved quickly. The courthouse was already swarming with security, so he took the long way around, cutting through side streets, avoiding security cameras, keeping his face obscured. By the time he reached the parking garage, Laura's car was already waiting. Michael hesitated for only a second before slipping into the passenger seat. She looked at him. You look like hell. Michael smirked. Thanks. Then her face hardened. Michael, listen to me. You have one shot at this. If we're caught, I know, he said. Laura shook her head. No, I don't think you do. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for Ethan. And for Sarah. Michael met her gaze. Then let's not waste time. Laura slammed the car into drive, and they sped away, leaving the courthouse behind. Laura's car sped through the dimly lit streets of downtown, weaving between traffic as she gripped the wheel tight. Michael sat beside her, tension coiling in his chest. He wasn't safe, yet none of them were. You better have a plan, Laura muttered. Because once the court realizes I helped you escape, I'll be in just as much trouble as you. Michael checked his phone. Still no reply from Richard or Sarah. He didn't have time to wait for them. He had to act now. I need to find proof that Reynolds planted those financial records, Michael said. If we can discredit them, the court will have to reconsider my case. Laura scoffed. And where exactly do you plan on finding that proof? Michael hesitated. He had one idea, but it was dangerous. We go to Reynolds' weak spot, he said. Langley. Laura shot him a look. Are you insane? His fixer is the last person who'd help us. Michael turned toward her. Not if we make him believe Reynolds is turning against him. Laura exhaled sharply. You're really gambling with our lives here, Michael. He gave a grim smile. What else is new? They found Langley at a high-end lounge in Midtown, exactly where Michael expected. Reynolds' right-hand man always kept up appearances, cocktail in hand, expensive suit, pretending he wasn't a criminal in a city full of them. Michael and Laura entered unnoticed. He adjusted his collar, keeping his head down. If anyone from the courthouse spotted him here, his situation would go from bad to worse. Langley was seated in a corner booth, laughing with two women. Michael didn't wait for an invitation. He slid into the booth across from him, eyes locked onto his. Langley blinked in surprise, then smirked. Well, I was wondering how long it'd take for you to crawl out of whatever hole you're hiding in. Michael leaned forward. Reynolds is setting you up. The smirk faded. Excuse me? Laura kept watch as Michael continued. You think you're safe, Langley? You think Reynolds won't throw you under the bus the second the court gets too close? The moment I go down, who do you think they'll come after next? Langley scoffed, but Michael saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. You don't have proof, Langley said. Michael smiled coldly. Then why are you sweating? Langley exhaled slowly, setting down his drink. He was too smart to admit anything, but he was also smart enough to recognize when he was in danger. Finally, he spoke. What do you want? Michael slid his phone across the table. The real financial records. The ones Reynolds forged. You help me clear my name and I disappear. You never see me again. Langley studied him, then laughed under his breath. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about you anymore. The moment this case hit the courtroom, it became bigger than some old vendetta. If Reynolds wants you gone, you're gone. It doesn't matter what's real and what isn't. Michael's stomach tightened. He had expected resistance, but not this level of certainty. Then Laura spoke. You think Reynolds will protect you, Langley? She leaned in, her voice dangerously calm. How many of his problems have you cleaned up? You think he sees you as untouchable? Langley's jaw tightened. Laura smiled. We both know he's going to kill you the moment you're no longer useful. So the way I see it, you have two choices. You help us and disappear on your own terms, or you wait until Reynolds makes you disappear. Silence. Then Langley let out a slow breath. Damn it. Michael knew he had won. 1 hour later, Michael walked back into the courthouse this time, with evidence in hand. Langley had given him everything. The original documents, the transactions Reynolds had forged in his name, and even a recording of Reynolds giving the order. Richard was waiting for him in the hall, eyes wide. Are you insane? You're supposed to be in custody. Michael handed him a flash drive. Tell that to the judge. 15 minutes later, Judge Holloway sat in stunned silence as the evidence was played in the courtroom. Reynolds' voice filled the air. Make sure the records trace back to Carter. I want him buried. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Judge Holloway's gaze turned to the prosecution. Ms. Mitchell, I assume you have an explanation for this? Grace looked pale. Your Honor, this changes everything. The judge nodded slowly. Indeed it does. She turned to Michael. Mr. Carter, the court acknowledges that this evidence raises serious doubts about the case against you. Michael felt Ethan's eyes on him. Sarah exhaled in relief. Then the judge turned to the officers standing nearby. Issue a warrant for Jonathan Reynolds. Michael let out a slow breath. It wasn't over, but it was a start. He turned to Ethan, who was watching him with something new in his expression, not fear. Respect. For the first time since this nightmare began, Michael knew one thing for sure. The truth had won. Michael Carter may have cleared his name, but justice never sleeps. What happens next? Will Reynolds stay in the shadows? Or is another battle waiting to unfold? If you love the story, let us know in the comments where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories full of twists, suspense, and action. You won't want to miss what's coming next. See you in the next one.